bones, dust in the air. Eyes to the ground, no one cares. Empty streets, whispers bite. Lost my way in the dead of night. Rock bottom, yeah, I felt the crack. Time to rise, time to fight back. Climbing up, no chains, no lie. Gonna find my way back to the top. Gonna find my way back to the top. Scrape knees, blood on my hands. Falling feels like sinking in sand. Echo scream, can't drown them out. Heartbeats loud, I'm done with doubt. Rock bottom, yeah, I felt the crack. Time to rise, time to fight back. Climbing up, no chains, no lie. Gonna find my way back to the top. The shadows laugh, but they don't own me. I've burned before, now I'm free. Fire in my veins, ashes in the wind. I lose, I learn, I begin again. Rock bottom hit it, yeah, I felt the crack. Time to rise, time to fight back. Climbing up, no change, no lock. Gonna find my way back to the top.
All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Mike from Unknown Tech, and welcome to the Architect Podcast. Today is Saturday, January 3rd. It's 11 a.m. Eastern, and I hope you're having a great holiday and a great New Year's. So today we're going to get right into it and actually go through our annual lab review, and we're going to talk about the new mini lab that's going to be put in the new house in Florida. As you guys know, if you read my blog post, you know that I'm moving to Florida here in a couple weeks. And I've already started putting the foundational pieces in place, and we'll review that. But I want to focus on the main lab today, and then we'll get into the new lab planning that we're doing. All right, so let's start by sharing my desktop here. Let me share my screen. Okay, so before we get into the software, let's look at the actual hardware itself. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to use the whiteboard. I have a pic of the rack diagram, the pic of the actual rack itself with the equipment in the rack located in the basement of my home. This will be staying here for the time being. And essentially, it really hasn't changed much from last year. I'll talk about some of the changes I did make. Remember that last year I talked about not investing any money into this environment. I actually had to replace drives. I consider that maintenance, so I don't consider that an investment. But in my NVR down here, which I'll talk about in a minute, I had to actually replace some drives because they were failing. So let's start at the top. I'm actually gonna go here and draw. And you can see here at the top, let me make this bigger. It's very bright on yours. Let me change the background if I can here. Let me hide this. I'm not sure why it's not letting me pick a black background here. Oh, that's a note. Just bear with me. Here we go. That might be a little bit better. I apologize for the poor pic quality. Okay, so essentially what we're going to do here is we're going to start at the top, and let me pick the... Of course. Sorry about that. Just bear with me a second here. Okay, there it is. Let me bring it back. Okay. All right, let's try this again. Okay, so starting at the top here, we have the Triplite PDU. All right, so that's the PDU here. That's a 10-port, I believe, Triplite PDU. In the back, there's 10 ports, and then I have a front-facing port. They're all NEMA, I think, a 110 ports or 115 ports. That's all I need for my lab. I don't need anything greater than that from a power perspective. Here I had this brush panel. This is right from Ubiquiti. So this is a UniFi brush panel. All right, that allows me to pass through cabling, right? And then here is kind of the heart of the networking, which is the Dream Machine SE. Okay, and you can see here I have a drive here, but I don't use this drive. This drive is empty. So this is basically a Dream Machine SE. And you're probably wondering why I haven't upgraded to the Dream Machine Max. I don't need it, right? So I don't really need the Dream Machine Max. The Max would actually come with 2 drive bays. I won't need those bays at all because I have an NVR. I'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the reasons I kept this and I haven't upgraded this is that the 8 ports that are 1 gig ports on this device, from a switch perspective, they're PoE, right? So I do power my cameras for the house off of this device. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's probably not a best practice because typically you have a separate switch for PoE. And of course, you would segment the cameras off. My cameras are segmented on a VLAN, right? That don't have routability. They only connect to the NVR. So that's the only way that they can get firmware updates or they can be accessed. I can't directly access the camera, so I don't use like a RTSP protocol at all for the cameras. They basically connect directly to the NVR. And so this is in its own VLAN, so it's completely segmented away, even though I'm using the switch. So it's logically segmented from a VLAN perspective. There are other ports here, like the IPMI ports for these 2 servers down here. They connect into here, right? Because I don't need to use 10 gig for that. And then, of course, there's some other connectivity in here. I don't recall exactly what it is, but most of it is IPMI and cameras. Okay. Over to the right, we have the internet, right? Basically the WAN port here, and then the 10 gig port here, SFP, right here, and that's the basically connecting to the switch down here. So before we get to that switch, I have a patch panel here, which is a pass-through. We'll just call this patch. And you can see here it's got 24 ports, and I'm using 4 ports basically on each end, right? And then I put these covers in here for dust covers to make sure that there's no dust that get through here to actually get to any of the devices on the back end, right? So basically, I try to keep this as dust-free as possible and keep it clean. But essentially, over to the left, right, I have these ports. These ports are for my servers. They're dual 10 gig uplinks, basically, for the servers down here. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then these ports over to the right, we have basically 1 port that connects to the this switch here. So we'll talk about the switch here. So this is a XG24. That's a 10 gig switch. That's an enterprise XG 10 gig switch from Ubiquiti, right? So it's a UniFi Enterprise XG24 that gives me 24 10 gig ports, 2 25 gig ports. All right, so I have 2 25 gig ports over here, and the rest are 10 gig ports. So you can see here I have in black, those are the uplinks to the servers down here. Red is the security. So for my NVR, here's another PDU, by the way. This is the PDU I basically use the most. Okay. Eventually, these two PDUs will be replaced by a unified PDU, a 2U unified PDU. All right, which will stick out the front, and then you'll see, a brush panel come in and pass through the power cables. Okay, similar to this. Down here we have the UNVR. It's not the Pro, right? The Pro would have, I believe, 8 drives or 6 drives. The UNVR has 4 drives, all I need. Okay, so essentially, this is the only upgrades I've done to the lab this year. Is I've replaced the drives that were in here. So I had 4 terabyte NAS drives in here from Seagate, and they were failing like crazy in here. All right, and actually had a 4 terabyte in the UniFi Dream Machine SE2 as well, which failed. So I had basically 3 drives fail, and so I replaced them with the Seagate surveillance drives, the AI surveillance drive, 8 terabyte apiece. So basically replace these drives, and now I have 4, right, 8 terabyte drives in basically a RAID 5. And what that gives me is it gives me roughly 24 terabytes of NVR storage. So generally speaking, with the cameras that I have, I can go about 6 months, 8 months of continual footage. Okay. And that's pretty much all I need, because the cameras that I have, right, I basically have 4 cameras. We'll go over here. And the connection's off of here. 4 by cameras for the house. Okay. One's a doorbell, right? So one's the doorbell, the unified doorbell that sits on the front. I have a camera, a PTZ camera in the front right corner of the house. I have a ranch home, so it's 1 floor, including the basement. And that pan tilt zoom is automatic. So basically, on motion, the pan tilt zoom will actually move automatically with the motion, okay, and record. All right, so that covers the entire front of the house, basically from a 180 perspective, right? So if you took a view of the house as a flat, right, it would cover all of that from the pan tilt zoom perspective. Okay. In the back on the other corner, I have basically a dome camera, UNVR. I want to say it's a G6 dome that basically covers the angle of the house that way in the back, pretty much all of it. And then I have a garage on the left-hand side, basement, and over that I have a G6 Instant that's connected to a floodlight. Okay, so basically what happens is when I have a motion sense back there, the floodlight will go and it'll record. The G6 will record. Okay, and the floodlight's day-night, right? So it doesn't go on during the day. It only goes on during the night. And essentially, that's a wireless camera back there. It's a G6 wireless camera. All right. So that's the 4 cameras. So basically the doorbell, the pan tilt zoom in the front. I should have a pan tilt zoom back here, but I don't. I may replace that with one. I'm not sure yet. But I have a dome back here in this corner, which covers pretty much the whole backyard. And then the left side of the house, kind of the blind spot area, which faces my neighbors. Okay. Which has a hedgerow, in a little driveway that goes out to a shared road, that is protected from a G6 Instant. And then on the right side of the house, where I have a blind spot, I have basically a hedgerow where it's very impossible to get through. Right? I mean, you could get through it, but it's very deep bush, right? So I do have a little blind spot on that back side of the house, which I should put something back there. Maybe I'll do another dome on there on this corner over here, which would cover that, but I haven't run any cable for that. Okay, so it's kind of the security setup, right? Security setup is going through UNVR and the 4 cameras, and the UNVR is connected. In the back, it comes with an SFP plus 10 gig port, and I have basically an SFP to 10 gig RJ45 module that connects back into this XG switch, all right, for 10 gig connectivity. All right. This switch also is kind of my aggregation, right? So people always say, well, are you really using that for 10 gig connectivity? I'm using it for both, right? So it's basically aggregation too, because in my office, right, I have 2 10 gig switches over here One is packed up now because that's coming with me, but I essentially have a 10 gig switch, Flex XG4, four 10 gig, 1 gig switch here that handles the wireless connectivity and the mesh upstairs. Okay. And also connects my workstation here at my desk, 10 gig, and connects some other devices here as well. All right. So that trunks back into one of these ports here. I want to say it's this white one here, right? So that white port goes to a Flex XG, 4-port, 1-port. Okay, so basically 4-port 10 gig, 1-port 1 gig. Okay, and that's up in my office. So essentially, I'm treating this UniFi Enterprise XG24 as a aggregation switch as well as a data center switch. Okay, and the reason I say data center is because these two servers here, and I'll go to the right side because it's a little bit better. These two servers are running Nutanix. All right, so that's Nutanix Hyperconverge. And I put plus because there's a lot of other Nutanix services running on these. Okay, and they're only single servers. Okay, so there is no high availability, right? There's no 2-node high availability, which I could do if I wanted and have a witness, but I'm not going to do that. But basically, they're just single servers, and they're for demo purposes and testing. And so I don't really need high availability. I'm not self-hosting any quote unquote production ready systems for the demos for Nutanix. Okay. And so I call this the data center switch too, because it's actually servicing HCI and server traffic through these 4 ports up here. Okay. And so it's basically running multiple roles, aggregation and data center switching. Okay. Now, one of the things I thought about was putting 25 gig SFPs or CX6 or CX7 Mellanox in these devices and connecting them to the 25 gig ports on the. I could do that, right? That's another thing that I'm thinking about doing. That's a possibility. I don't need to do that right now, though. Okay. And we'll talk about the services that I'm running on here when we get to the software piece. Down here, I have a CyberPower. Oh, I can't even tell you. PDU, or excuse me, UPS. And basically all of the 2 PDUs connect back into the CyberPower. And of course, this provides me the battery backup. Okay. And it has a built-in network interface, which actually connects back up to here. Okay. So it only does 10 by 100, I believe, for the network interface card that I actually installed in the UPS. And so I have a managed environment, which can now be connected to these different devices, right? When the power goes out to do orderly shutdowns. And that's what I do, right? I have a configuration to do orderly shutdowns of my devices when the power goes out, okay? One of the things you don't see up top here is I have a NAS that's sitting on top here, and it's a QNAP 1635. So this is an old NAS. Okay, it only has a Gen 1 Xeon D processor in it, 8 cores, 15. I think it's or 4 cores, I believe, with 8 threads. I think it's a 1521. It's got 128 gigs of ECC memory though in there. And essentially, and I'm going to go into the device and actually show you what it looks like in the layout. Essentially, it's, I want to say it's probably from 2017 now. It's an older device. It's got dual 10 gig ports, 4 1 gig ports. It was pretty robust when I bought it at the time. And it's basically my cold storage, and it's running a single VM. And it used to run some containers, but because it's only 4 CPUs or 4 cores, 8 threads, I didn't want to tax it that much. And so it's only running 1 VM right now, and it's running basically the Active Directory DNS. Okay. And then I have a secondary domain controller at the camp and a third domain controller, which will be going in the Florida home. All right. So I basically have a meshed, 3-node Active Directory DNS at 3 locations. Okay, right now I have it at 2 locations, but generally speaking, my primary domain controller, PDC, right, with DNS, doesn't do DHCP, is running on the NAS, and I'll show you what that looks like. So that's essentially the lab. Like I said, it's pretty much unchanged from last year. The main core lab, that was the goal. The goal was not to put any money. The only thing I did, like I said, was did some maintenance activities for the replacement of the 4 terabyte Seagate NAS drives that were failing. I had 3 fail, and I've had Seagate drives for the longest time, especially the NAS drives, and I've never had a failure, knock on wood, once until I got those. And they were a little older. Like, I mean, they were older generation of the NAS drives, and they just couldn't handle the NVR duty. So I got basically surveillance hard drives from Seagate. AI, they're the new AI surveillance drives, and I bought 8 terabyte drives and replaced all the drives in here. Okay. Now, just quickly on the servers, they are basically identical servers with the exception of GPUs. Okay, so the 2 servers, they're using Silverstone 4U cases. Okay, and the reason I use these is because you could also get the white panels, which I did to match everything, because the cabinet is white and most everything in there is white with the exception of the PDUs and the UPS. They're basically identical servers. So basically they both have, from a part perspective, the ASRock Rome 2D. Let me just make sure I got this right here. I think it's the Rome D8-2T. Okay. And they're not quite identical. Basically, one has a different NIC. So one has the Intel X550 AT2, and the other has the Broadcom NIC. So one is the Rome D8-2T EPYC motherboard, which contains the Intel, and one contains the Broadcom dual 10 gig NICs. Okay, but effectively they're identical outside of that. And I'm running basically EPYC Milan, 64 core processors in each. Okay, and I got those from eBay, and they're engineering samples and unlocked. Okay, so basically I went on eBay and I said, I'm not going to spend all this money on 64 core processors. I mean, really, I wasn't even going to buy 64 core. I was going to buy 32 core processors. And the deal I got from a 64 core perspective for engineering sample that was unlocked, that would work on the motherboard, was great. So I bought those 2 processors with the motherboard, and then I bought DDR4s. These are older platforms. This is like last gen. I bought DDR4, 3200, and I bought 64 gig DIMMs, right? So that gave me 512 gigabytes per server of RAM. So 64 cores, 512 gigabytes of RAM. Quite honestly, I wish I had a terabyte of RAM. RAM is my limiting factor right now. Okay, believe it or not. Because of all the things that I run. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. What I love about this board too is the amount of PCIe, Gen 4 PCIe lanes you get, right? So the only shared by 16 slot in here is the number 2 slot. And it's shared with the second M.2 and the Oculink connector. Okay, so that's the only slot that is shared. Everything else, and by the way, it's shared, it's bifurcated, right? So if I populate this, or if I use the second M.2 or the Oculink, right, I can only use 8 lanes of this by 16 slot in slot 2. Every other port, right, Gen 4 PCIe 16 slot is full PCI 4 16 lanes. So a ton of PCIe bandwidth. So in my management server, when I say management, it's basically the core server that runs all of the management folk, right? All the management services for everything Nutanix. Okay, so all the NKP, which is the Kubernetes management platform, the object storage services, etc., all run the Prism Central, which is our management plane, right? Basically our control plane, that all runs on this server with other VMs that I use for testing, right? Other core testing or demos, right? And when I say core, I mean like virtual machine capability, DR, those types of things, right? I'm using this device. It doesn't have anything other than the NVMe drives in here. And so I have an add-in card in one of these slots in each, and it's basically a 4-port Gen 4 PCIe Gen 4 by 16 add-in card that has 4 M.2 slots on it. Okay, and each one of those contains a 4 terabyte or 4 terabyte HPE Gen 4 NVMe devices. Knock on wood, those HPE Gen 4 NVMe drives are great. They have been great. No problems whatsoever. They're very, very fast. No issues. And very, very robust from a serviceability perspective, right? Meaning that I don't have to replace them. They basically have a lot of capacity and life, right, from a terabytes written perspective, right? And I'm always tearing things up and building things, and so I'm always constantly, building things, deleting them, and so that's on an SSD and M.2. Over time, that will start to wear, but these are very, very good from an M.2 perspective. I haven't had any problems, knock on wood, with either of those, and they're in both. Okay, so that basically is the hyperconverged storage, and I'm running single node hyperconverged for each. So the only resiliency that I have is from a disk perspective, right? So I do basically replication from disk to disk. That's what Nutanix does. Like a RAID 0, but not RAID. Okay, where I'm doing a mirror, right? Copying all the data from disk to disk. So basically, I can tolerate disk failure, but obviously I can't tolerate a node failure. I could, because I do have replication going to the other side, but I don't get HA, right? It's more of a DR event. Okay, so that's one. That's basically the servers, and the other secondary server is primarily for cloud native and AI workloads. So I strictly run the Nutanix Kubernetes platform on that server, right? From a workload perspective, not the management layer, and then all the AI services from Nutanix run on that, as well as AI apps. So things like N8N, they all run on that server in Kubernetes, right? On NKP, which is our Kubernetes platform. Okay. Within this server for GPUs, right? Remember the CPU and the memory and the disk layout are the same, right? As server one. In this server, the difference is the 2 GPUs. I have one NVIDIA L4 GPU and one NVIDIA T4. Okay, so I basically have 2 GPUs within this platform that are being leveraged using Nutanix Enterprise AI, right, for inference. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. So those are the 2 servers. Again, I in previous episodes talked about should you buy enterprise gear for a home lab? And my use case was specific. I wanted to have as many cores as I could, the ability to expand memory as much as I could, right? All the PCIe lanes if I wanted to add GPUs, right, for AI or for other reasons. And that's the reason why I went with this platform. And I bought it when a little bit after the current gen, right, Genoa, right, came out. And so when current AMD gen came out, I'm not even sure if Genoa is the current AMD right now, but when that came out, prices for the previous platform basically dropped. And the reason why is because the new platform's DDR5, and so you couldn't reuse that. And so you had old platforms that basically couldn't be upgraded, right? You couldn't add the new CPU architecture. It took different memory, the new platform. So when that happens, right, you have the ability to actually go back and buy really great enterprise grade gear at a very high discount. Now, today it's impossible from a memory perspective. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it's very, very hard. I mean, again, if we're talking about home labbing here, I use it for work, so I made an investment. Okay, like I said, I use it for demos with real customers, right? I use it for marketing events with real customers, right? So it's real gear being used in a sense, almost for production, right? But in your use cases, you may not look at it that way, right? You may just want a home lab that has some self-hosted services, or you want to play around or test things, right? Where you don't need to have enterprise grade capability. And people always say, well, I'll lose IPMI remote capability. That's not true because they have different KVM functionality, which we'll talk about in a little bit, that you can buy, that you can pretty much make anything remote, right? Remotely managed, like Jet KVM, which I use for my non-enterprise gear, right? So the ability to remotely manage things, to install, OS or remotely, or to triage or troubleshoot through an out-of-band platform. You can do that on pretty much any I wouldn't say any device, but any server, whether it's a enterprise server with an included IPMI like these, or a mini computer, right, where you attach a Jet KVM to, and you still have the ability to, or a Pi KVM, right, where you still have the ability to remotely manage and troubleshoot or triage or do maintenance on, right? So that ability is there, and you can certainly achieve a lot of the capability that I do, without, of course, the PCIe lanes and the expandability with mini computers, right? Those little boxes, like not NUCs, because NUC has kind of been purchased by ASUS, but similar to the old NUCs, right? You have all these different vendors out there like GM, I think it's GM Tech or GMK Tech, Minis Forum, right? All these different vendors that are creating these mini PCs. Or you can go on servethehome.com, and Patrick over there does a mini micro series, and they have a bunch of mini computers, right, that are generally for corporate environments, for desktops, that they repurpose for home lab use, right? Okay, so let's get into the software really quick. That's the main lab, right? That's staying here for the foreseeable future until we sell this house, right? And we, fully move to Florida. I'll be moving to Florida first. And then we have basically a smaller home. Basically, it's not a condo. It's like, they call it a villa. It's a shared single story, like a ranch, right? It's only 2 bedrooms, so nowhere near as big as this house here. And basically, that's where we're going to start. And then when we sell this house, when my daughter graduates, we're going to buy a house on the west coast of Florida, and that'll be the permanent residence until the end, right? Until we pass it on to our kids. Okay, so essentially, again, this lab will stay here, and it'll be remotely managed. And I want to get into the software really quick here. So the first thing that I have set up here, and I want to show you, is the Unify solution, right? So this is Site Manager, and Site Manager gives me the ability to manage multiple sites. And I believe there's a limit for the free version of Site Manager. I think you can do hundreds of sites. If you have a different plan, I think you have to pay for it. I can't remember. But essentially, I have 3 sites, and they're all meshed together. Before, I had 2 sites. I had the Dream Machine Special Edition, which is the one down in my basement, or which is my primary home gateway. And then I have the UDR, which is a Dream router, which is okay, and that's up on the camp, and it does pretty good. It's not a UDR 7, it's UDR 6, which still does good. The wireless covers the whole house and around the house, because it's a smaller camp. It's only not, I think, 850 or 900 square feet, so it's smaller, and so the UDR was a perfect fit to basically give you coverage in the whole camp, and it does the NVR duty as well. So it is limited though from a NVR perspective. Okay, so basically what the Dream Router has, is it has a micro SD slot. And so what I did was I got one of the faster micro SD, higher capacity ones, and I input that, and that's the storage that the NVR uses. And at the camp, I basically have 3 cameras. Okay, so I have a camera covering the front driveway and the front door. I have a camera covering the road coming in, and I have a camera over the back deck and the back facing the lake. Okay, so basically I have very good coverage. I do have a small blind spot, not very big, meaning in order to get to that blind spot, you would have to pass through the other cameras. So I'll see you coming there, and there's no entrance into the house on that blind spot, right? So I basically have everything covered at the camp with those 3 cameras, and they're domes. They're G6 domes, which are great cameras. Very easy to install. They're installed right on the soffit, and it gives me great capability. I have to actually go up there. One of the cameras actually, we've had some bad, terrible weather here, and the winter has been horrible, and the wind has been very bad. This is probably one of the worst winters to start that we've had here in a long time. And so one of the cameras is down up there. I have to go up and see what happened, see if it got disconnected or whatever, maybe from the wind or something. But essentially, I have 3 of the dome, right? The dome cameras, G6 domes at the camp, which work great. The other site is this Cloud Gateway Fiber. So this is the new house in Florida. This is what covers the house in Florida. I talked a little bit about this, and I'm not going to go into detail because in part 2 of this, which will be today, or I'm not going to go to another, after we get over the main lab environment, and we go through that, we're going to get into the plans for the house in Florida, because the networking foundation is already in place. When we closed in the house, I went down there, I did all that, and I had to actually work from there. So I had to have connectivity while I was there. And so I put the network foundation already. So everything's already there, ready to go. And now I just have to get the mini lab set up down there, so I have access to some compute, a NAS down there, etc. So I'm not going over the WAN and coming up here again. I don't pay for. I take that back. I do pay for it, but it's part of the HOA, and it doesn't give me. I want to say it gives me 512 down, and I want to say, or 500 down, and I think 20 megabits up for the included internet plan down in the community in Florida. So, which is good. And I'm not going to upgrade. I don't need to upgrade any more than that. Okay. So in order for me to do NAS and all that, I want to do it locally. I don't want to do NAS across the WAN, of course. Now, one thing that you can set up on this is a mesh. Okay. You can do direct connections or you can do a mesh. And I have my sites connected through what's called the SD-WAN feature in UniFi. And I allow specific subnets to talk to each other, okay? And they're, obviously for reasons for me to connect to my lab here, do maintenance. Of course, I'm going to have access to a lot of that. And so I have this mesh network set up between all 3 sites, okay? So if I wanted to connect my Cloud Gateway to my Dream Router, I can do that at the camp. If I want to connect to my, from Florida to my main house here in the lab, etc., or anything on this network that's in these subnets, I can do that as well, okay? So that's another great feature of using UniFi. It's basically 2 clicks to get this set up, right? Depending on how many networks that you want to allow visibility to, right? So that's that. And I get metrics, right, from a site perspective, right? I can get full metrics, ISP view. I can look at all the devices and see where we are from an update perspective. And I can actually look at APIs, right? I can create an API key. And if I wanted to have a third-party solution connect via API or to do things or to get information, right, I could do that through the API, which I don't have set up, okay? So that's kind of the core networking side of it. And we'll talk about the Florida home here in a little bit. So let's go over to the server software. So right now I'm running Nutanix software. It's not the latest version because 7.5 just came out. It's 7.3, so it's the previous version. And so I'm running pretty much all of the Nutanix services with the exception of one or two. I'm not running intelligent operations, right, or any of that, because I want to make sure that I have as much capacity, right, for workload perspective, because my demos are really about showing art of the possible. And yeah, I can certainly have intelligent operations be spun up and show that, but I have other ways of doing that. I don't need to do that in my home lab. I can do that within a shared environment that Nutanix provides me as an employee, right? But essentially you can see here I have all these services running. I have the infrastructure, which basically is the HCI part of it, including the hypervisor, right? So I have complete visibility on the storage, the networking, the virtual machines, right? The consumption, visibility into all my VMs. And I can do that through the compute layer, right? You can see all my VMs running here. I can get details on the VMs, NICs, recovery points if I wanted to look at DR, right? Events, metrics, right, per VM. What do the disks look like, right? What categories are assigned? So categories in Nutanix are basically like tags, and you can do you can assign policies based on tags or categories within Nutanix, okay? You know, what hardware is it using? In this, I don't have any GPUs, so let's look at one that has GPUs. So I have this GPU here. So if I go here to hardware GPUs, you can see here I have the L4 pass through to this node. And this is basically a VM, but it's a Kubernetes node, okay? I can create templates, right? I can add Kubernetes clusters here for visibility if I want. I can upload OVAs. These are all my images, right? For my deployments, whether they're OS ISO images or disk images, right? I can use those and deploy based on disk image, and of course create templates based off those images, etc. And then the catalog feature is deprecated, so we won't talk about that. And then storage, right? We have this concept of storage containers. It's basically, think of a storage container as a data store like VMware has. Very similar concept. This is a lot more logical though, right? This is a logical pointer back to the storage pool, right? So you can see here I have storage containers, but a storage pool is basically a culmination of all the disks in your cluster. And then you create containers to point back to that storage pool, okay? And generally speaking, you don't create many storage containers, right? Storage containers are based on requirements and use cases and then policies, right? Because you assign all of the storage policies to storage containers, right? From a data reduction perspective, right? You may have a storage container that has all of the data reduction technologies. It may have inline compression, it may have deduplication, it may have erasure coding, right? And so you create a storage container for that. But if you had a storage container that only needed inline compression and it wouldn't take advantage of the other two, you would create a storage container for that, right? So I only use compression, right? I don't have enough nodes to do ECX, and I'm not using deduplication because there's overhead to that, and I don't need to use it. Okay, I just don't use a lot of storage. Okay, each node has basically, if I go back to the dashboard and I look cluster storage, right, you can see the utilization from a storage perspective on each node is very, very small. So I don't really need to use dedupe. I do get a lot of benefit from compression though. All right. And of course you have storage policies, right? You can create, you can limit IO and throughput, right? From a storage policy perspective, you may have low-hanging fruit that you want to limit, right? Or you may want to have limitations set on applications, etc. You know, you can do that as well. I'm not going to go through a complete demo of this, but basically I'm showing you all of the infrastructure side of this, which is your data protection, which has your protection policies. You can see here I have a protection policy. This actually is connected to the other server, right? So I'm using the other server as a target for DR. Okay, so I have my protection policy. It's very simple. You know, it's an RPO of an hour, and I have 3 VMs protected under that policy. Okay, and then your recovery plans, right, which is basically the ability to orchestrate the recovery of VMs. You can do a test, you can clean up. If you do an update, right, you can see the recovery. Okay, I'm going to recover from my management cluster to my cloud native cluster. It's going to be a manual effort, or it could be, right, and I can do my startup, and I can add delays in the startup, right, and I can add scripts if I wanted to, right, post-startup scripts. So you guys are thinking probably, oh, it's like SRM. Yeah, it's like SRM, but it's built into the platform. There's no separate VM or database that I have to deploy and manage all this other crap, right? It's integrated into the platform, okay? Then, of course, gives you full visibility into the hardware, your hosts, your disks, your GPUs, your NICs, etc. Activities such as alerts, events, tasks, audits, right? All of that's there. Operations, again, I don't have intelligent operations deployed. All right. So think of this like if you're a VMware person, think of it like your VROPS or ARIA operations, right? That is what intelligent ops is similar to that. And that would be a separate deployment. Okay. I don't have it deployed. I talked to you. Remember, I told you I didn't have that deployed. And then administration, I'd set up my tagging, right? My users, projects, right? Projects are like soft tenancy, right? So basically, I can carve out, I can set up projects for specific users that those users have RBAC access only into that project, and I may want to put quotas on what they can consume within the project. So it's not true multi-tenancy yet, okay, but it's similar. It's like a soft tenancy, put it that way. Availability zones, right? So do you have availability zones? So say I wanted to create my availability zones. Mine is local, and I have 2 clusters within the local availability zone. But if I had a remote, in a real DR situation, I would have a remote availability zone, and you would set those up, and you'd have availability zones in here, and that way you can sync the availability zones. And that's what this entity sync is. So if I had another availability zone here, the entities within Prism Central would sync to the other Prism Central. And then lifecycle management, right? So lifecycle management is an admin center, and this is where I do all the one-click upgrades for Prism Central, right, which has upgrades, or Prism Element, which is the clusters, and then Prism Central, which is the management component, right? So I can do my one-click upgrades, and it does all of the software for me. So if I go in here, I can look at all the softwares: AOS, file services, Foundation, which is basically how you add a node right to the cluster, the hypervisor, our Nutanix cluster check, our security posture, right? All of those things can be upgraded through one click through the process. Now, I don't have a cluster. So when I do LCM, I have to shut everything. That's one of the problems, one of the pain points I have with not having a cluster, right? Is that I have to shut everything down, right, in order to do my upgrades. Because if I have upgrades that require reboot, it's not going to go through because the VMs are going to be operating, and it'll say, "Oh, you're not high availability, and you have VMs running, therefore I can't update." Right? So it's got some protection there, so you don't do things the way you shouldn't be doing them. Right? And in my case, I only have single nodes. All right. One of the other things I have running here is unified storage. So in unified storage, I have a filer basically, and basically the filer is a distributed group of VMs, right, which use block storage, right, and that block storage gets presented back to these VMs, and then those file service VMs can then lay down the protocol that I want to use. So if I want to use SMB, right, I can do that. If I want to use NFS, I can do that. If I want to use both, I can do that, right? So I'm using NFS, right? And this is generally speaking for Kubernetes, persistent volumes for read, write, many, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And of course, I can get the monitoring, all of that, right? All built within the platform. The other thing I use is objects, right? So S3 objects, and this basically gets deployed as containers, right? As a cluster group of containers, and I can create my buckets, and I can store my objects. You can see here I have Haiku, which is my backup solution. That backup solution actually backs up the VMs that I have and stores it in the S3 objects bucket, okay? And then I can tier that objects if I want to. I can tier it out to another S3 endpoint or Azure Blob, right, if I want to. You can see here I have AI models, right? There's model storage in there. And I have Velero, which is the backup for Kubernetes. And I actually have this Cozy bucket. So the Cozy bucket is basically for container object storage interface, basically. And what it does is automatically gets created when I deploy Harbor. It creates a Cozy bucket. So for my Harbor image registry and Nutanix Kubernetes, it gets deployed automatically if I want to use the S3 object storage for Harbor, all right, for the integrated Harbor in my Nutanix Kubernetes platform. Okay, so this one platform is running, and I have, one thing I didn't talk about is self-service, right? So I have the ability to do automation. You can see here I have a WordPress application. I have blueprints, right? So I can deploy blueprints, do automation, do all of that. And so this one platform does all of these things, right, does self-service automation, infrastructure services, files and objects, and Kubernetes, which I'll talk about now. So Kubernetes is here and it's running, this is the NKP platform. And so people have asked, like, why isn't NKP part of Prism Central? Well, I'm not going to get into futures with you, but I will tell you that NKP can be consumed in many different ways. And so this is another product of ours, and you're going to see Nutanix kind of move away from this reliance on the core platform, right? Meaning that you can, if you want to consume the core platform with Kubernetes, you can do that. And that gives you the best of both worlds, right? It gives you VM management and Kubernetes the way it should be done, right? VMs with a true hypervisor, tried and true hypervisor, and Kubernetes with a tried and true Kubernetes, because we don't use our own Kubernetes. We don't customize Kubernetes. We use pure upstream Kubernetes, right? Our value is in the production readiness and the control plane wrapper around Kubernetes, okay? We're not changing Kubernetes in any way. It's pure upstream Kubernetes. We're not providing Kubernetes, right? We are providing the control plane and wrapper and the integration, right? The production readiness of a Kubernetes platform, which is what customers want, right? They don't want to have customized this and customize that, and I have to download this, right, and use customized XYZ, AC, CLI, and all this other crap, right? They want to be able to use their own Node OSs, which we support multiple. They want to use pure upstream Kubernetes without any forks, right, or custom or lock-in, and that's what customers are asking for. That's what we've done with Nutanix Kubernetes platform. And so people ask, well, why is the control plane outside of Prism? Well, Prism right now is a virtual machine, right? Or a group of virtual machines distributed, right? And NKP's control plane runs in Kubernetes, right? So we bootstrap Kubernetes, implement the control plane, add the license, and set up all the other additional service capability automatically for you. Okay, so, and because it can be consumed and run on any substrate, remember I said it's not tied to Nutanix HCI, right? Even though we think you'll get the best of both worlds doing that, because you'll get the VM management and the Kubernetes container management in the way it should be done, meaning not using a 1.0 product like KubeVirt as an example, right? You still get all the goodness of operations that you know around VMs and all the goodness and operations you know about Kubernetes, okay, if you use the platform together. Now, there are a lot of our customers that just want a container platform, but they don't want the HCI solution. They don't want the HV piece of it. They may be doing something else, right? No problem. And, a lot of our customers still purchase Nutanix Kubernetes platform, and they run it on bare metal. They run it on VMware, right? They run it in the cloud, right? You basically run it on any substrate. And that's the whole point of it. And that's the reason why the control plane has kind of been decoupled from the Prism experience, even though it looks like Prism, okay? And so you get this full dashboard. You can see here in my Kubernetes clusters, the commander host cluster basically is the control plane for NKP, which I'm on right now. I'm logged into. I have one cluster that I use for demos, and then I have one cluster for my AI workloads. And that's the beauty of the NKP platform. When you use Nutanix Enterprise AI and you use NKP together, the ability to actually deploy Nutanix Enterprise AI right within the application marketplace within NKP, and then launch the actual service right from an NKP is very, very appealing to customers, right? It's built within, because Nutanix Enterprise AI plus Kubernetes give you full operational control, orchestration, and management around AI capabilities and inferencing. Okay, so I'm not going to get into a demo of that. You can see here I have AI stood up to Nutanix Enterprise AI. Again, that's running on the NAI cluster, right, within NKP. Okay. Now, here's another reason why some people say, well, what if I have Rancher and I like Rancher? What if I have OpenShift and I like OpenShift, but I still want to use your NAI services? You can still do that. NAI supports any CNCF certified Kubernetes platform. All right. So the ability to run our AI service capability on any Kubernetes platform. So you can see where Nutanix is going, right? We're a software company, and so we're allowing you guys to take advantage of running our software on multiple substrates, right? The ability to do that gives you much more flexibility, not choice, but flexibility, okay? We still believe that if you I got to go back to what I said earlier, though. If you were to procure, say you wanted a platform for AI, though, right? And you needed the hardware, the Kubernetes platform, and the AI service. We still believe that our full stack solution provides you the best value, right? Because you get all the LCM, you get all of the integration, right? It's very simple to operate, simple to set up, and you get a robust enterprise platform with all the data services I showed you from Filer, because you need those services, data services for AI workloads. Okay. Okay, so that's kind of that. And then I have some other things running right within Nutanix. I do have N8N, which is what I use for AI workflows and automation a little bit. Right now, I'm working on an AI demo for basically a Nutanix expert agent with using RAG, and I'm building this now for a demo I'm doing on Tuesday. And then just quickly, I do have my NAS here. So that's the Nutanix solution in those servers that I'm using. So I showed you the unified network, and I showed you the Nutanix platform right from the server's perspective. And now I'll just quickly show the NAS. If I can log in here, just bear with me a second. I have to get my pass key here. And okay. So this is the NAS here. Again, it's an older NAS, and I'm going to show you a little bit about what this looks like in the storage section. So go to storage and snapshots. Again, this is a little slower. It's not going to be snappy like the newer NASs because it's an old Xeon D, right? It's a Xeon D first gen, 1521, 4 cores, 8 threads with 120 gigs of memory, okay? So you can see here kind of the enclosure a little bit. It used to give you a view. Here it is. Okay, so you can see the view down here. It's probably hard to see. Yeah, see, it's not as snappy, right? But you can see the view down here to the left-hand side, okay? And this is what the device looks like from the front perspective, right? So you basically get 12 3.5-inch bays, 4 2.5-inch bays, and then on the back, I don't think you guys can see that. Let's see. Yeah, it's not showing you the back. On the back, there's PCIe slots, okay, and the network interfaces, right? So you have 2 10 gig network interfaces and 4 1 gig interfaces on the back of this. Internally, it has 6, I believe, SATA M.2 slots. Remember, it's older, so PCIe M.2 wasn't even out when this came out, okay? And so it supports SATA M.2, and there are 6 slots internally in this device. I don't use any of those slots, okay? So essentially, I have big drives in here, right? They're basically 16 terabyte Seagate Exos drives across the 8. I have 4 1 terabyte IronWolf SSDs up here in these 4 3.5-inch bays, because they actually take 2.5-inch drives as well. And that's basically for tiering. So I have what's called Q tier turned on. And then I have 4 SATA SSDs, Samsung Enterprise 1.92 terabyte SSDs in these bays. And that's for my VM and container storage. Okay. In the back of this, though, I have an add-in card, a QNAP add-in PCI card with 2 Optane drives that are for read-write cache. So it's a mirrored Optane cache. And if you go here to cache acceleration, right, I have read-write all I/O, right? And it's basically 2 110 gig Optane drives on that card. Okay, that's my caching. And then my storage is actually using what's called Q tier. Now I have 2 pools. One is the pool for VMs, and one is the pool for the storage. So if I go into the pool for storage, you can see here, I believe I'm using a RAID 6. I believe. Let me check. It's been a while. Yeah, so RAID 6. So basically 6 times 16 terabyte drives gives me 87.26 terabyte capacity. And then I have another RAID group for the other drives, which is in this same storage pool. That's for the Q tier. All right, so you can see here the Q tier auto tiering. And you can see here that there's capacity tier and then there's a high speed tier, right? And that does automatic data tiering in a schedule. And you can do it on demand or you could do a schedule, okay? And you can see here, you're probably thinking, well, Mike, you're not using a lot of this. I really don't use a lot of this right now. But I will be starting to move over a bunch of stuff before I move. All right, I have to do that on my PC, actually. The other thing that I can do here is I can do a hybrid mount if I wanted to, right? And I can connect to different hybrid solutions. So if I wanted to add like a cloud provider, something like that, from a storage perspective, I could do that. I could do a virtual JBOD in the cloud. That's one of the things you can do too. I use Backblaze, and I actually, for my critical data, most of its pictures, I do back up to Backblaze, right? So there's a Backblaze connection in here that goes back and does the backup for that. I do have Container Station stood up, but I removed all the containers here. I don't need it. And then for my virtual machine, again, I only have one virtual machine running here, and that's the domain controller running Windows Server 2019 or 2022. Okay, and that's running the AD. It says secondary, but really it's the primary now because I got rid of the primary and basically made this the primary. And this is running the AD and DNS services. Here's my virtual switch. Oh, here's the back, right? Here's the back up here. You can see it a little bit. There's the two 10 gig ports. One 10 gig port is used for management and storage traffic. The other 10 gig port is basically a trunk port, and that allows me to tag VLANs for the virtual machines within the device. Okay, so that's kind of the core lab that's in the house here, and it'll still be being used. Okay, I do want to just turn the attention to, bear with me a second. I want to do this really quick. I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to do I'm not used to the whiteboard, to be honest with you. Let me add a new whiteboard. Let me format the background to black again. And then let me add bear with me a second. There's another diagram I want to focus on. This one here. Okay, so this is essentially the plan for the Florida house. Now, you guys, if you watch my previous episodes, I built my own DGX Spark. Okay, that's sitting right here. I am repurposing this. So this is basically a mini lab DGX, right? And it had an RTX 4000 in here, and I took that out, and I added a 10 gig card with two M.2s. This is going to be Proxmox running down at the house in Florida. So that's basically my virtual platform down there. That's where I'll run my third domain controller, other core services that I need down there. And then that'll be outside of the rack. So basically I purchased a Pi rack, which is very cheap. I think it's called Geek Pi, whatever. And I bought a small LCD for it for monitoring. That'll be in 1U. It's not the 7-inch. It's actually smaller. It's like 6 point something inches in a 1U footprint. So this diagram's a little bit off. Make this bigger. Okay. And basically, so this right here will really be 1U. Right? That'll be 1U. Right? So 6 point something inches. And then I'll have the Cloud Gateway Fiber, which is UniFi, which that's the new gateway. Pretty phenomenal device. Okay, so this has 4 2.5 gig ports. One of them is PoE, and it has 3 10 gig, 2 SFP plus, and 1 RJ45, 10 gig port. Okay, It also has an M.2 slot. Okay, so I bought the tray for this, and I bought a 4 terabyte Western Digital M.2 drive, and I installed it. Okay, and that will primarily be the NVR storage for the house down there. There'll be 3 cameras. There's 2 cameras down there now. There'll be 3 total cameras, and they're going to be all wireless cameras down in the house because it's a smaller home. Okay, I'll have a 12-port patch panel, which I've already boxed up. And you can see here how I'm going to connect this. I'm going to talk about this in a minute. And then below that, I'm going to have the Flex XG 10 gig switch. So the 2, remember I said I had 2 Flex XG switches here. One of them is coming with me, and it's going down there, and it's going to be repurposed for the rack. Then I have basically a 3D printed panel, right, that has slots for 2 Jet KVMs. That's 1U. So I have 2 Jet KVMs in a 1U slot, right? And that'll basically connect to 2 devices, the Proxmox server and one other device that I want to talk about here in a minute. Under that will be the Ugreen DXP 480T NAS, and I have a 3D printed mount for that already. And then at the bottom will be an NVIDIA DGX Spark. So a real Spark. I actually purchased one. And you're probably like, well, Mike, you said you weren't going to buy anything. Well, I did. And the way I did it was I had to sell a bunch of things. Okay, so I sold my 5090. You guys knew I had a 5090 workstation. I got top dollar for that, like $2,600. And then I sold PlayStation 5. I sold some other computer gear that I had laying around. And basically, fundamentally, it paid for the DGX Spark. And I was playing with it. I've been playing it for the past couple weeks. I've already boxed it up, so that's coming with me. And so the DGX Spark is very, very small. It'll fit nicely into the. There is no 3D print for this yet that I can find. I may have to make one. I don't have a 3D printer yet. I probably will get one, but I don't know yet. I don't know if I'm going to get into that. That's another. I can already see myself spending more money. I don't want to do that, right? I've already bought the DGX Spark, and I probably will just put it on one of the trays that come with for now with the rack. And then to the right of that, a Unify UPS. They're sold out. I can't find them. So hopefully by the time I get down there, they'll be in stock, and I'll order one. So I'll have a UPS for the rack. And then on the left side will be the Proxmox server, because I could fit this in long ways. I could fit this like this into the rack, but it'll take 2U, and it's pretty heavy. So I probably will just stand it up, right? Either on the right or left. Probably the right side. That way air could flow through into it, right? But that'll be the Proxmox server, and that'll be basically the lab. So the lab down in there I'll have an all-flash NAS, which is the Ugreen DXP 40T, that has 4 terabyte solid-dyne drives in it. So basically 12 terabytes of NVMe capacity for real storage. And a RAID, it's basically a Btrfs, not traditional RAID. That way you get snapshots, etc., right? And so that's pretty fast, 10 gig. And the way this will connect is basically the NAS and the Spark will connect to 10 gig ports on the Flex XG, as well as the Proxmox server, which you don't see here. And that's one thing I have to add, is the Proxmox, which will be basically on this middle one here between the green and orange. Proxmox will have a 10 gig port to that. And then the Jet KVMs, right, will connect to 2 1 gig ports on the Cloud Gateway Fiber, and then they'll have Ethernet connectivities for the remote KVM support for both the DGX Spark and the Proxmox server, right? So I'll be able to remotely connect it to both of those, and that's the plan for that. And it's an 8U case, 10-inch 8U, very, very small, right? Very compact. It's going to go in the den area of the Florida home, which I'll show you. So when I do the next video, it won't be here. It will be in Florida, and it will be on building the mini lab down there. Okay. So that's pretty much where I'm going. The software, like I said down there, is going to be the DGX software, right? The DGX OS, which basically is Ubuntu 24.202, I think, or 22.04, I believe. And it has all the NVIDIA software on it, basically the DGX software, right? Similar stack to what I showed you on the do-it-yourself HomeLab DGX. All right. Ugreen. I haven't decided if I'm going to use the Ugreen software or not because it is made in China, and I get nervous about software, like operating system software coming from China. To be honest with you, I may replace it with TrueNAS Scale. I'm not sure yet. We'll see. And then for the monitoring, I have to figure out how to connect this. It will be connected to the Proxmox server. And so I have to pass through the onboard Intel CPU to a VM that's going to have the monitoring software running on it. So I have to do that as well. So stay tuned for that. That'll be another session that we do either through a blog post or through a podcast. So that's kind of the home lab plans. You saw what I have. I haven't changed much in the primary lab, which is I stayed true to that. Of course, the DGX Spark purchase was funded by selling some things, so I didn't really spend additional funds, so to speak, for that. But of course, I had to spend additional funds for the other house, for the core networking. One thing I didn't talk about is I do have 3 cameras. I have 2 cameras in the house down there now. They're G6 Instance, so wireless. It's going to be all wireless cameras down there, and they've been doing pretty good. I haven't had any hiccups on that. And so I'll probably just stick with that. And the wireless I went with down there, which was different, is an outdoor UniFi AP7. So the range is spectacular. It is a big device. It's heavy. So you can't mount it you couldn't mount it on a ceiling, but it had to be in a stud. It's very, very heavy. So when I mount it, it's going to have to be mounted to probably the side of a desk or something. But essentially it covers the whole house and outside the house. It's got phenomenal coverage, and it's Wi-Fi 7. So I'm going to be using some device that'll be using Wi-Fi 7 down there. So, okay, so I hope you enjoyed today's session. I know I went long, about 10 minutes, and I hope it gives you some ideas on some of your home labs and where you guys will be going. And I hope to talk to you soon. The next time I do this will be in Florida, hopefully. I look forward to talking to you then and seeing you then. Have a great one.